Welcome back, listeners. Or if this is your first time here, welcome to the show that breaks down the fascinating stories and ideas behind the most talked about books. Imagine a world where the most powerful financial institutions bet billions on risky loans and lose. A world where a few daring outsiders see the cracks forming and gamble everything against the system, uncovering the truth behind the most significant economic collapse since the Great Depression. What if I told you that the biggest financial meltdown of our time wasn't just inevitable, but engineered? Today, we're diving into Michael Lewis's electrifying expose, The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine. This isn't just a story about numbers and spreadsheets. It's a tale of high-stakes gambles, colossal greed, and a handful of quirky outsiders who saw the financial apocalypse coming. They didn't just predict the crash, they bet against it and walked away with millions while the world was falling apart. What's in it for you? Learn how the global financial system turned into a house of cards. Meet the unlikely heroes who took on Wall Street and won big, and uncover the shocking truths about power, ambition, and greed that Wall Street never wanted you to know. Whether you're a finance aficionado or just curious about what really happened during the 2008 financial meltdown, this episode will have you on the edge of your seat. So grab your headphones, settle in, and get ready to dive into a world of high finance, high drama, and high stakes. You won't want to miss a second of this gripping journey. Let's get started. Chapter 1: A Secret Origin Story. In the first chapter, Michael Lewis introduces Steve Eisman, a Wall Street analyst whose irreverent and skeptical approach sets him apart from his peers. Eisman's journey into finance was almost accidental. He initially trained as a lawyer, only to find he hated it. Through connections at Oppenheimer and Co., a smaller, old-fashioned Wall Street firm where his parents worked as brokers, Eisman transitioned into finance and became an equity analyst. From the outset, Eisman's blunt and confrontational style emerged, clashing with Wall Street's polished decorum and conformity norm. Assigned to analyze companies in the subprime mortgage industry, Eisman encountered Ames Financial, a company involved in risky loans to individuals with poor credit histories. He was shocked by their business model, which capitalized on the desperation of borrowers and overlooked the reality of their financial instability. This specialty finance category of lenders extended credit to Americans who struggled to obtain it elsewhere. To Eisman, these companies appeared less like legitimate businesses and more like predatory entities set on exploiting the financially vulnerable. Unlike most analysts who adhered to the Wall Street code of avoiding negative assessments, Eisman openly criticized the subprime lending practices he observed. He didn't sugarcoat his analyses and even publicly disparaged companies he believed to be deceitful. His scathing report on Lomas Financial, another subprime lender, was a bold move that disrupted his industry's usual politeness and shocked colleagues, who were unaccustomed to such a forthright condemnation of a company's practices. Steve Eisman's perspective was a blend of outrage and curiosity. He harbored a deep-seated distrust of companies that profited by pushing the boundaries of ethical finance. His assessments were not merely based on financials, but on an instinctive sense of justice, often articulated in biting critiques. As he honed his skills as an analyst, Eisman became one of the first to notice the moral and financial hazards inherent in subprime lending. His skepticism toward the industry foreshadowed the crisis that would later unfold, positioning him as a rare voice of dissent within a sector headed for catastrophe. Chapter 2: In the Land of the Blind, Michael Burry, a former neurologist with an unconventional path to finance, stood out on Wall Street for his meticulous approach and willingness to dive into complex, often overlooked areas. Initially self-taught in investing, Burry gained a following online for his stock picks before founding his hedge fund, Scion Capital. While he initially focused on undervalued stocks, his attention soon shifted toward subprime mortgage bonds. Through careful analysis, Burry noticed a troubling trend. Lending standards in the mortgage market had drastically declined. Banks and financial institutions granted loans to borrowers with poor credit histories and little income. New mortgage structures, like interest-only loans, allowed borrowers to make minimal payments upfront, but left them vulnerable to eventual defaults. As he pored over bond documents, Burry became convinced that the subprime mortgage market was dangerously overextended. Recognizing an opportunity, Burry decided to bet against these risky mortgage bonds. Lacking a straightforward way to short mortgage-backed securities, he turned to credit default swaps, CDS, a type of insurance that would pay off if the bonds defaulted. Convinced he was one of the few who grasped the impending crisis, he began purchasing these swaps, confident that mortgage defaults would soon surge. Burry's heavy investment in CDS contracts puzzled his investors, who couldn't understand his dim outlook on a booming housing market. Many questioned his decisions, and some even attempted to withdraw their funds from Scion Capital. Unwavering, Burry relied on his deep analysis rather than popular sentiment, sure that he had uncovered a fatal flaw in the financial system. His strategy made him one of the earliest participants in the Big Short, positioning him to profit when the subprime market finally collapsed. Chapter 3. How can a guy who can't speak English lie? Steve Eisman's deepening investigation into the subprime mortgage market introduces him to Wing Chao, a CDO manager who embodies the careless greed running through Wall Street. Chao's job is to bundle risky mortgage-backed securities into collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and sell them to investors, earning hefty fees in the process. When questioned about the risks, Chao admits that his priority is not the performance of the investments but his own fee income. This approach highlights a major flaw in the system. Those who create and sell CDOs have no real stake in their success or failure. As long as Chao sells CDOs, he earns his fees regardless of whether the underlying loans default. Eisman is stunned by this revelation. CDO managers like Chao profit simply from the volume, pushing the risk of failure onto investors who often rely on rating agencies for guidance. Rating agencies, paid by institutions whose products they rate, routinely issue high ratings to these bonds without genuinely understanding or examining their quality. This setup blinds investors to the dangerous levels of risk embedded in these financial products. Eisman realizes that the entire subprime mortgage market functions without genuine accountability. Each player in the chain, from mortgage originators to CDO managers to rating agencies, has an incentive to look the other way, relying on others to assess. The system's design leaves no one responsible for the fallout, creating a cycle where greed overshadows caution. For Eisman, the encounter with Chao confirms that the mortgage market is filled with hidden dangers. His suspicion turns to certainty. Wall Street's unchecked practices fuel a financial disaster, and those involved either don't see or don't care about the eventual consequences. Chapter 4. How to Harvest a Migrant Worker. Michael Lewis focuses on a new group impacted by the subprime mortgage crisis, low-income borrowers. As the demand for mortgage-backed securities, MBS, surged, banks and lenders found ways to qualify almost anyone for a mortgage, regardless of their ability to pay. In many cases, this involved targeting economically vulnerable people, often with limited understanding of the financial commitments they were being sold. Many of these borrowers were first-time homebuyers or individuals with poor credit, drawn in by promises of low teaser interest rates that would soon balloon, making monthly payments unmanageable. Subprime mortgage originators, driven by the immense profitability of selling loans to Wall Street, adopted aggressive sales tactics. Many of these loans were predatory, with terms intentionally obscured to prevent borrowers from understanding their true cost. In California's Central Valley, one of the hardest hit regions, mortgage brokers would go door to door selling mortgages to agricultural workers and other low income residents, convincing them that home ownership was within reach. The chapter reveals the human cost of Wall Street's relentless pursuit of profit. These borrowers, enticed by dreams of stability and security, soon found themselves drowning in debt. As the housing market heated up, the demand for risky loans only intensified, and brokers targeted the most financially vulnerable individuals. For the financial institutions involved, these borrowers were just numbers in a portfolio. For the borrowers themselves, they were life-altering commitments with severe repercussions. Eisman is appalled to realize how much exploitation is woven into the fabric of subprime lending. The market's relentless appetite for risky mortgages shows little regard for the lasting impact on borrowers' lives. This chapter underscores the destructive forces unleashed by Wall Street's quest for profit, revealing that, to many within the industry, people were no more than figures to be manipulated in pursuit of wealth. Chapter 5. Accidental Capitalists Michael Burry, who had bet against the subprime market early on, encounters mounting skepticism and pushback from his investors. Although he is confident that the housing bubble will burst, Burry's investors are uneasy. Many fail to understand his shorting strategy and are frustrated by the lack of immediate returns. As the housing market continues to rise, some investors even request to withdraw their funds, doubting Burry's conviction and method. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, few take seriously the possibility of a collapse. Financial institutions continue to profit from mortgage-backed securities, with no indication of slowing down. Against this backdrop, Burry remains resolute, pouring through mortgage bond data and credit default swaps. He's convinced that defaults will soon increase dramatically, triggering a chain reaction that will validate his predictions. His confidence rests on his exhaustive research, but it isolates him, making him an outlier among both his investors and Wall Street at large. Steve Eisman, on the other hand, has become more vocal about his criticisms of the subprime industry, calling out banks and firms on their dubious practices. He continues to scrutinize the financial underpinnings of mortgage bonds and notices alarming trends. As defaults begin to appear sporadically, Eisman feels vindicated in his views. He watches closely as signs of trouble start to emerge, confirming his suspicion that the entire mortgage market is built on shaky ground. In this chapter, Burry and Eisman solidify their roles as accidental capitalists, driven not solely by profit but by a contrarian instinct and a deep distrust of the financial system. As the crisis looms closer, they see the cracks forming, standing nearly alone in their belief that Wall Street's profits are based on an illusion set to unravel. Chapter 6. Spiderman at the Venetian. As the subprime mortgage crisis inches closer, Wall Street's behavior grows increasingly reckless. Michael Lewis introduces us to a Las Vegas conference held at the Venetian Hotel, where financial insiders gathered to discuss the booming mortgage market. Traders, analysts, and bankers, many of whom profit directly from mortgage-backed securities, convene to exchange ideas and strengthen business relationships, creating a surreal atmosphere of celebration even as warning signs begin to emerge. In this world, blind optimism still reigns, and few seem to grasp the gravity of the underlying risks. Steve Eisman attends the conference, viewing it as an opportunity to understand the latest developments in subprime mortgages and the psychology of the industry insiders who fuel the bubble. He is both amused and appalled by what he observes. Sessions cover topics on increasing profits, expanding mortgage accessibility, and creating complex financial products, with little discussion of the risks involved. Eisman encounters people who are profiting from the subprime boom, but lack a fundamental understanding of the products they sell or the potential consequences of their actions. During the event, Eisman speaks with several industry players and is struck by their detachment from reality. Most attendees are eager to sell more mortgage-backed securities, indifferent to the possibility of massive defaults. One individual even compares the complexity of mortgage-backed securities to the power of Spiderman, indicating the near mythical status they've attributed to these financial products. The conference solidifies Eisman's belief that the industry's confidence in mortgage-backed securities is irrational and unfounded. He returns from Las Vegas more convinced than ever that a financial catastrophe is inevitable. The conference serves as a stark illustration of the unchecked greed and denial gripping Wall Street, with insiders unwilling or unable to see the looming disaster. Chapter 7: The Great Treasure Hunt. With the financial crisis on the horizon, Michael Burry, Steve Eisman, and other outsiders intensify their efforts to uncover the full scale of the impending disaster. They focus on identifying the riskiest mortgage-backed securities (MBS) and collateralized debt obligations (CDOs) that are most likely to fail, aiming to maximize their profits when the market collapses. Burry, who has long held credit default swaps (CDS) against subprime bonds, watches the numbers closely, confident that defaults are about to spike. In their pursuit, Burry and Eisman navigate a financial labyrinth filled with opaque products and hidden risks. Eisman, who views the entire subprime industry with a mix of fascination and disgust, continues to analyze the loans within various CDOs, unearthing the questionable accounting practices and unrealistic assumptions underpinning them. Each discovery reinforces his conviction that these financial products are disasters waiting to happen. For Eisman and his team, identifying these specific bad assets feels akin to a treasure hunt, though the treasure is, in reality, the financial rot threatening to bring down Wall Street. Amid the complexity, both Burry and Eisman face resistance from banks and investors who remain skeptical of their doomsday predictions. Banks, particularly those who sold them CDS contracts, attempt to dissuade them, sensing that these shorts could lead to significant losses. Burry encounters pressure from his investors, who are growing impatient with his unconventional strategy. Despite this, Burry and Eisman press on, fueled by their growing certainty that the housing market and the institutions that back it are on the brink of collapse. This chapter captures the frantic, yet focused efforts of these contrarians as they race to gather the last pieces of evidence. While Wall Street remains largely oblivious, Burry, Eisman, and a small group of skeptics see the impending crash with increasing clarity, positioning themselves to reap the rewards when the subprime market finally implodes. Chapter 8: The Long Quiet. As the housing market edges closer to collapse, a strange calm settles over Wall Street. Subprime mortgage defaults have begun to rise, yet financial institutions and investors largely remain in denial. For Michael Burry, Steve Eisman, and the few others betting against the market, this period of quiet feels unnerving. They are waiting for the signs of failure they believe are inevitable, yet the market remains stable longer than they anticipated, testing their patience and resolve. Burry, who has committed heavily to credit default swaps, faces growing discontent from his investors who see no immediate returns and begin doubting his strategy. Some investors push back, demanding explanations for his lack of action as the market continues its steady climb. Despite the pressure, Burry holds firm, confident in the data he's analyzed, which predicts a coming wave of defaults. This waiting period, however, strains his relationships and tests his confidence as he is forced to defend his approach against mounting skepticism. Eisman, meanwhile, scrutinizes the rising default rates among subprime borrowers. To him, the data shows a clear pattern. The financial instruments underlying the housing market are cracking, but Wall Street's structures are still propping them up. He observes with frustration how major financial players refuse to acknowledge the gathering storm. Many remain entrenched in the belief that the housing market can't fail, reinforcing the illusion that the market is still solid. The long quiet becomes a final period of calm before the storm. For Burry and Eisman, it's a tense and isolating time as they wait for the crisis they've foreseen. This quiet reinforces the psychological toll of their contrarian bets, and the pressures they face only heighten their determination. As the chapter closes, they brace themselves for the eruption they know is coming, even as the rest of the financial world continues to ignore the warning signs. Chapter 9. A Death of Interest. In this chapter, the crisis begins to unravel at last. The long-anticipated wave of mortgage defaults starts to hit, and the subprime market crumbles under its weight. For Michael Burry, Steve Eisman, and others who bet against the market, the signs of collapse are both validating and surreal. The financial institutions that had dismissed the risks are now scrambling to manage the fallout as massive losses accumulate across Wall Street. As defaults rise, the value of mortgage-backed securities (MBS) and collateralized debt obligations (CDO) plummets. Burry, whose credit default swaps (CDS) against these bonds are finally paying off, begins to see substantial profits. However, his investors, previously skeptical of his strategies, now want to cash in on these returns, forcing him to navigate both their demands and the administrative complexity of his windfall. Burry, who had been ridiculed for his predictions, finds himself vindicated but exhausted by the turmoil and strained relationships that came with his commitment to his contrarian vision. Eisman, meanwhile, watches as the failures ripple outwards, affecting nearly every part of the financial system. The banks and firms that had promoted subprime mortgages and CDOs now face devastating losses. Yet Eisman feels no satisfaction in watching them fall. Instead, he is filled with a mix of anger and disappointment at the consequences for ordinary people and the economy at large. The system's design, which rewarded short-term gains over long-term stability, is now collapsing, and millions will bear the brunt of the financial disaster. A death of interest serves as the grim realization of what Burry, Eisman, and their peers had foreseen. As Wall Street's obsession with profit comes to an end, the scale of the damage to the financial system becomes undeniable. The chapter is a dark turning point, highlighting the profound consequences of Wall Street's unchecked excess and the devastating impact on those outside the financial world. Chapter 10. Two Men in a Boat. As the financial crisis reaches its peak, Michael Lewis shifts focus to two contrasting figures, Steve Eisman and Michael Burry, who both emerge as unlikely victors in a broken system. Having successfully predicted the collapse of the subprime market and profited handsomely from their foresight, each finds himself grappling with the personal and ethical implications of their success. Despite the financial rewards, neither man feels an overwhelming sense of triumph. Instead, they are left with a mixture of disillusionment and frustration at a financial system that allowed, even encouraged, such reckless behavior. Eisman, who had seen the housing bubble as an impending disaster long before the mainstream did, reflects on the toll of his contrarian stance. His predictions have come true, and he has made millions, yet he remains disturbed by the widespread human and economic costs of the collapse. He finds himself questioning the ethics and structures of Wall Street, where so many had either ignored or profited from the dangerous loans that brought down the economy. Michael Burry, likewise, emerges from the crisis with substantial profits, but finds himself ostracized by investors and peers who doubted him. His journey, marked by intense scrutiny and skepticism from his own clients, has left him exhausted. Burry's unconventional methods and persistence in holding to his strategy resulted in major gains. Yet the journey has taken a personal toll. He has been left isolated, both by his investment community and by the emotional weight of his lonely battle against the tide of Wall Street. As the chapter closes, both Eisman and Burry are left wondering if their victory was worth the cost. The crisis has proven them right, but that their sense of achievement is overshadowed by their knowledge of the vast consequences, affecting countless lives and destabilizing economies worldwide. They emerge as survivors in a sense, having braved the storm they foresaw. Yet they are haunted by the systemic flaws that still persist in the financial world. Epilogue. Everything is correlated. In the epilogue, Michael Lewis reflects on the aftermath of the financial crisis, laying bare the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. The crisis did not just impact individual banks and financial institutions, it revealed a deeply interconnected global financial system, where even minor miscalculations or reckless decisions had massive ripple effects. For Steve Eisman, Michael Burry, and others who foresaw the collapse, the crisis is a grim validation of their predictions. But the fallout is far-reaching and tragic. Despite the enormity of the crisis, Lewis points out that Wall Street was largely allowed to continue its practices unchanged. Government bailouts propped up the very institutions responsible for the collapse, allowing them to recover quickly while millions of people lost homes, jobs, and savings. The financial institutions that created and profited from toxic mortgage products walked away relatively unscathed, with many top executives retaining their wealth and positions. This lack of accountability deeply frustrates Eisman and Burry, who had hoped that the crisis would lead to lasting reforms and stricter oversight. In the final analysis, Lewis underscores that the problems revealed by the 2008 crisis remain largely unaddressed. The financial system structure and incentives continue to prioritize short-term gains over stability and accountability, leaving the door open for similar disasters in the future. The epilogue serves as a sober reminder that without significant change, the conditions that led to the crisis could easily emerge again, underscoring the enduring need for transparency, regulation, and genuine accountability on Wall Street. Thank you for joining us on this journey through The Big Short, inside the Doomsday Machine. We hope you found this BookSum as fascinating and eye-opening as the financial events it covers. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, follow, and share the podcast with your friends, family, and anyone who loves uncovering the stories behind the numbers. Sharing is the best way to help us grow and bring you even more engaging content. If you're interested in exploring more finance-focused wisdom, check out some of our other BookSum episodes. You might enjoy Season 1, Episode 8, where we dive into timeless principles from the richest man in Babylon, or Season 1, Episode 2, which explores life-changing lessons from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And don't miss Season 2, Episode 2, where we unpack the psychological side of money with the psychology of money. Remember, this BookSum is just the beginning. The full book is packed with even more details and insights that we couldn't include. If you are inspired to take a deeper dive, consider reading the entire book. And if you decide to buy it, please use our affiliate link. It's a simple way to support the podcast and help us keep delivering episodes you love. Thank you for being part of our BookSum community. We'll see you in the next episode. And until then, keep learning, growing, and exploring the world of ideas.